Who are the top NFL free agents this off season? What's going on, BLV football fans? It's Mitch with my NFL 2024 free agency preview. This is a position by position breakdown, unlike any other that you will find on YouTube, on any social media platform. I do not care where you go. This is why you subscribe to the Bottom Line View. This is why you spike the like button. This is your NFL free agency top 10 at every single position in the NFL, from quarterback to cornerback, from center to defensive tackle. Comment your opinion. We are live. I want everybody's opinion on the position rankings. I want everyone's opinion on the diamonds in the rough, on the overvalued, on the undervalued, on the players that you would like your team to sign, and more. This is your in-depth breakdown of 2024 NFL free agency. Let's waste no more time. Let's go, baby. Don't forget to spike the like button. NFL free agency predictions coming very soon. But first, we have to talk about how good these players actually are. So let's start at the most important position. Let's start at the quarterback position. And there's a decent crop of quarterbacks out there. Baker Mayfield was not tagged, so he's officially a free agent. Kirk Cousins, a free agent. It's rare that you see like a top 12 quarterback in NFL free agency. Funny enough, the other times we've seen it, it's rather been Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, or Kirk Cousins. And I think Kirk Cousins has been here a couple of times. But let's take a look at my top 10 quarterbacks. Some pretty good, some starting caliber, some borderline starting caliber, some high-end backups. My top 10. Kirk Cousins is my number one quarterback. In my opinion, one of the at least 12 best quarterbacks in the NFL. You could plug them in on a majority of NFL teams, and they would perform at least to an average rate, if not above average. I think Cousins has a chance to go somewhere alternatively to Minnesota this year if he so chooses. I think he will have a market of a few teams that he can look at. The thing with Cousins will be, how expensive will he be? He's coming off of a torn Achilles, so that's a big question for Kirk Cousins. How much does that lower his value? How much does that put the ball in the team's courts across the NFL? But Cousins is really good, really accurate, awesome off-play action, really intelligent quarterback. If you want a guy that you can win now with, Kirk Cousins is that guy. Baker Mayfield would be an alternative. Baker Mayfield was a Pro Bowl quarterback this year, was able to stay healthy this year, is a former first overall pick in the NFL draft not that long ago. Baker Mayfield has a strong arm. Baker Mayfield has shown that he can win in the NFL and go to the playoffs twice and win 2 playoff games. Yes, he has accomplished that. But unlike Kirk Cousins, he's inconsistent. It depends on the situation around him. It depends on the situation in terms of coaching, personnel, offensive line, defense. A lot of things, right? So Baker Mayfield is, I think, maybe hitting the peak of his career, which is intriguing, but he's also inconsistent. Gardner Minshew, he had a very nice season from Indianapolis. Gardner Minshew is an accurate quarterback, a smart quarterback, one of my favorite backups in the league for a majority of years, and he has been proven as a backup. If you need a high-end backup, you're worried about your starter's health, you're worried about the possibility of him missing a few games, Gardner Minshew is the guy to lean on. He nearly got the Colts to the playoffs this year. He was the backup for the Eagles a couple years ago when they went to the Super Bowl. Sam Darnold, I like the talent of Sam Darnold. He's still relatively young. Sam Darnold, I thought, looked decent, filling in for Brock Purdy at times this year, but he was actually pretty good with Carolina a couple years ago. When you contrast his ability against Bryce Young this past season, he looks even better. I think a lot of people look at Sam Darnold and say he's a bust from the Jets, and that might be true because he did not play well with the Jets, but that was a terrible situation. Defensive coach, really not a good scheme, not great players around him, bad offensive lines. He was young. He's maturing. He's gotten better. He's played in better systems. He could be a borderline starter, and I think you could get him for backup money. Jacoby Brissett is the same. I think I view him as a guy that has more experience in the NFL as a starter than a Sam Darnold or even a Gardner Minshew. He's been there. He's done that. But he can step in at any point and he can win games for you. And I like his arm strength. I think if you could protect him, he can make all the throws. He's a very good guy in the locker room, very good leader, very good off the field. Jacoby Brissett is a guy that I would love to have as a bridge option or just a mentor. Ryan Tannehill is somebody that you would bring in if you want to compete for the starting job. I recognize and I realize that Ryan Tannehill is a little bit lower than maybe some would think. I initially had him at number 4. I moved him down to number 6. Reason for that, Ryan Tannehill looks a little bit physically deteriorated. Sam Darnold, I think right now he's quicker, he's twitchier, he's faster, he's got a stronger arm than Ryan Tannehill. Jacoby Brissett, I think, still is at an age where his arm strength hasn't wavered. I still think, between the two, I think Jacoby's a better backup, like mentality-wise. Tannehill feels a little bit like he's got a chip on his shoulder, an edge. Maybe you like that about him, but at the same time, it feels like he's kind of a little bit arrogant. I don't know, maybe that I'm reading too much into that. But I just really didn't like the way he played in Tennessee for much of the year. But that being said, he wasn't protected very well. He didn't have great receivers. The run game was hit and miss. So Tannehill was in a tough situation. Joe Flacco obviously played great last year when he had to step in for Cleveland. He's Joe Flacco. He's playoff Joe. We know what he is. He's experienced. He's a Super Bowl champ. He is elite. But at the same time, he's old as dirt. So I don't know if you're getting the same Joe Flacco you got this year. Carson Wentz. Wentz is talented. We saw that in the last game against the Rams. He's got arm strength. He can move, I think, better now than he could a couple of years ago. That showed up in that game. He showed that off pretty good with, I think, 12 rushes in that last regular season game. He has definitely played NFL quarterback, experienced playing as a starter, nearly won an MVP one year, but he's gone through, the rigors of the NFL. He's gone through the experiences of getting injured. He's gone through the experiences of not playing well, of playing behind bad offensive lines, of playing with good offensive lines. Carson Wentz, I would sign him up as a high-end, in terms of talent. I think he's got high-end backup potential. I think he recognizes he's a backup now, which is a good thing. Tyrod Taylor is just a pure backup that has a lot of experience. He's got mobility. He won't turn the ball over. I like him in that regard. Drew Lock is more of I just love Drew Lock. You guys know how I feel. He's just entertaining, fun, a great guy in the locker room, a great backup in terms of providing energy and spark to your team. He's got really good arm strength. I think he's got physical upside in his game. And he's become a little bit mentally sharper. He stepped in for Geno. He played decent against the Niners. He beat the Eagles. So Drew Lock showed some things this year that I didn't think he previously had. So those are my top 10 quarterbacks for NFL free agency this year. Let me know your opinion on those and your opinion on the players and your opinion on my list. In terms of the players, diamonds in the roughs, the overvalued, let's turn the page to that. The undervalued players at quarterback, this is just my basis on what I think they're going to be paid, how much I think they're going to get, what they should get. Sam Darnold, I think, is a guy that I had on this list last year, as well as Jacoby Brissett, and I feel pretty good about putting them on the list once again. Sam Darnold, again, I just feel like he didn't get paid barely anything to be the backup of San Fran, but if you're playing that West Coast offensive style, let's say you're the Rams and you need a backup for Stafford and you're worried Stafford's going to get hurt, or you're the Vikings and maybe you need a transition starter, maybe Cousins leaves and you need a guy that can step in and be mobile enough to operate outside the pocket on a boot action and be able to run a little bit and then have the arm strength to be able to get the ball to Justin Jefferson and company. Sam Darnold could be a bridge starter for a team like that. Or you've got Jacoby Brissett, who I thought kind of got, kind of messed around in Washington. Like, he didn't really get a fair shake at the starting job. They just gave it to Sam Howell. Sam Howell played pretty well for like half the year, but there was times where Jacoby looked like the better player. So I just feel like Jacoby's underrated because he played well for Cleveland. Then for whatever reason, he didn't really get a chance in Washington until like mop-up duty. And now he's back on the market. So Jacoby's still out there. I wouldn't mind him to go to New England to be a bridge option there if they take a rookie quarterback. Drew Lock, I just think he's undervalued because I think he's one of those guys that he's growing mentally at the position. I think he's gotten better year after year after year in terms of mental capacity. He started in his NFL days with a lot of turnovers, bad processing, but he's always had physical skills, a lot like Sam Darnold. The mobility, the arm strength to be able to get the ball there and step into a game and be able to rip the ball around a yard and be able to play a few games every year and give you a chance because he at least has starting traits. Buyer beware. Kirk Cousins, obviously, if you're going to pay him $40 million a year, $35 million a year, $30 million a year, it's expensive to pay a quarterback at his age, coming off an Achilles. It's a little bit buyer beware. You've got to beware of that, right? It's the whole word behind the description of Kirk Cousins. It's like, yeah, he could be good. He could be great. He could win you a playoff game. But at the same time, is it worth the risk of setting back your franchise if you sign him 2, 3, 4 years? Ryan Tannehill, just in terms of if you're looking for him to come in and be a starter the way that he probably thinks he is because he was in Tennessee, and you don't get that, like, that's going to be tough. You're going to miss a season. Like, let's just say Ryan Tannehill, right? He goes to Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh wants him to be the starter. Arthur Smith was his former coordinator. They try to make that connection in Pittsburgh, and for whatever reason, it falls flat. Like, that could very well happen. Josh Dobbs was the final guy. Josh Dobbs, I just felt like he could be a buyer beware because he might be paid a little bit too much than really what he's worth. The Pastronaut, right? He had really good moments with Arizona, but he also had really low moments that nobody saw. He had really good moments with Minnesota, but he also had like moments where he was playing behind Nick Mullins and Jaron Hall. I think that's his name. I don't even know. So Josh Dobbs is a guy where if people are just going off he's smart, he's a good guy, he's an astronaut, like he played well, he's got some mobility. Well, did you watch the games where he got benched for Nick Mullins? There could also be that as well. So that's the quarterback position. Let me know your opinion on the quarterback position. Gronk spike the like button. Let's get to the running back position and my top 10 running backs in free agency. Saquon Barkley is my number 1 running back. The reason is this is a combination of age, skill set, and potential in terms of like leaving your destination and getting better. Because I honestly feel like running back a lot in this NFL is correlated statistically to situation. And Saquon has been in one of the worst situations in the NFL basically for his entire career, starting when he was a rookie. I think he was a 2nd overall pick. He was a rookie phenom. He had 2,000 yards. He's had ups, he's had downs, he's had injuries. He's had terrible offensive lines. He's had terrible quarterback play. He's had terrible schemes at times. But he's also shown, like last year in 2022, he could kind of carry the team from an energy standpoint, from a motivational leadership standpoint, and put that team in the playoffs and really, have a great game against the Vikings and all that stuff and have a great season and be one of the premier running backs that can carry the ball 20 times, that can catch it 60, 70 times. He can play on all 3 downs. He can be explosive. And he's a really, really good competitor. I think that's what's underrated about Saquon Barkley. He's going to bring a lot of good things to your team. Josh Jacobs is similar. I think Jacobs is a little bit less of the competitor that Saquon is, but he's every bit the ball carrier. Saquon has some hit and miss moments in terms of, vision. He's not as explosive as he used to be, which is maybe made him, instead of a top 3 running back, like a top 10. But Josh Jacobs is around that range as well, but he's a little bit more downhill, hard-nosed, tough, gritty, powerful. I think he had a rough year this year. Just he couldn't really find that same juice that he had during his season of being the best running back in terms of rushing yards in the NFL. He led the NFL in rushing yards in 2022. But in 2023, he just seemed a little bit, maybe out of shape for a bit. He seemed a little bit slower, and that was coming off an offseason where he was negotiating a contract. I think a lot of that played into it. But he fit that McDaniels offense to a T. I also like what he brings to the receiving game, does Josh Jacobs, in terms of his route running, in terms of his hands. I think he's reliable on all 3 downs. He can pass block, so can Saquon. Derrick Henry's my number 3 because of age. I think in terms of if you were just going to sign one guy for 1 year, I think you could make an argument for Derrick Henry at number 1. But it's just an age thing for me. Derrick Henry is going to obviously be more of a 2-down running back as opposed to a 3-down running back. He's not much of a pass blocker, or is he not a receiver? He mostly gets all his receptions from screens and stuff like that, little dump-offs, designed plays. He's not a route runner per se like a Saquon is, or an Eckler later on this list. But Derrick Henry is an explosive runner, still had a fantastic year, low-key last season. I thought he still played really well. He is a little bit less explosive than he used to be, but he's every bit as big, as powerful, and he can bring a real dimension to your running game that is rare. And if you're a playoff football team, I think Henry gives you a lot of value because typically later in the year, defenses wear down, their bodies deteriorate. It's hard to tackle Derrick Henry, especially in the cold. So he is big there. Tony Pollard at number 4. Pollard is interesting because he had a tough year as a pure starter this year, but he also has shown in the past that he has a lot of gas and he can really go when he's fully healthy. I felt like last year, maybe he wasn't 100% because he was coming off of a major Achilles injury throughout the offseason that he had to recover from. It clearly impacted his explosiveness, his ability to get to the edge, his ability to hit the home run. And I do feel like Tony Pollard is more situated to be a change of pace than a pure starter, but he could be a really valuable change of pace. Austin Eckler, I think at this point in his career, is not an every down player. He's more of a, in my opinion, a 3rd down kind of James White-esque player at this point. He's not as explosive as he used to be, but he's still a really smart player. He's still pretty quick. He can still pick up some short yardage, and he's a really good route runner and receiver. So I think anyone looking for that will go after Austin Eckler. DeAndre Swift, he is interesting because I think he definitely played pretty well for the Eagles last year. It was a bit hit and miss from a statistical perspective, but he gives you a little bit of everything. He's got a little bit of power, more than you would think. He's got a little bit of twitch and explosiveness. He's got good speed, not great speed, and he's got a little bit of receiving abilities. He's just not great in really any area, but he's solid in pretty much every area. So if you're looking for just a solid running back that might go a little bit cheaper as compared to Saquon or Jacobs, then Swift might be your guy. Gus Edwards is a power downhill running back who's been super efficient in running schemes like the Ravens, right? Obviously, 5 yards a carry pretty much his entire career. Has been really efficient, really good goal line running back. Devin Singletary had the best year of his career in Houston. He's mostly a zone-oriented running back. So if you're in a zone scheme, you want to look for Devin Singletary. But he really impressed me this year. I thought he played really well as the lead back for the Texans. Played hard, played a lot, played in the receiving game, in the running game. He's undervalued, in my opinion. A.J. Dillon is a power back, doesn't have a lot of speed, which I think kills his upside. But he can do a little bit of everything. He can pass block, he can catch, he can run. He's good in short yardage. He's still pretty young. Zach Moss had his best year of his career in Indianapolis, filling in for Jonathan Taylor. He's more of a power back, but actually he has a little bit more gas in the tank than I thought he did. He showed off some explosiveness this year that I didn't previously think he really had. So Zach Moss is that final number 10 running back. Those are your top 10 running backs in NFL free agency. Taking a look at the undervalued and the potential buyer beware candidates. Undervalued, J.K. Dobbins. I did not include, and by the way, guys, in terms of my undervalued assets and my buyer beware assets, My undervalued, I tried to find as many players that were not in my top 10 as possible, like the guys that are kind of like low-key. Maybe you want to pick them up. J.K. Dobbins, though, obviously former second-round pick of the Ravens, has shown flashes of high upside, but just can't stay healthy. So he's going to be signed to a one-year contract to some team. He has a chance to be the starter on a lot of teams, but he just can't stay healthy. So it's probably worth taking the risk on him for the upside. So if you're looking for like a second running back and you've got a pretty solid starter already, Dobbins might be a solid look. Or maybe you're a team that's like let's say the Eagles, where you don't really value the running back position, but you like kind of getting the diamonds in the rough and the gems and trying to make those guys really pop. Dobbins would be an interesting addition to a team like the Eagles, who look to get value at the position. Zeke is a veteran that can do everything. I thought he played really well for New England last year as the primary backup to Stevenson. The thing that I really like about Zeke is the fact that he can play on every down in every situation. He can pass block, he can catch, and he can run. He's not super explosive, but he's very savvy, and he's a great teammate. And I think a lot of people like Zeke. So he's a really good backup to a workhorse starting running back, like in last year's case, Ramondre Stevenson. So maybe a team like, I don't know, I'm thinking who would want like Zeke, but off the top of my head, it's hard to figure it out. Maybe a team like Buffalo that's gonna use James Cook a lot. Maybe they want a veteran for 1 year, Zeke, who can come in and play in every situation. They can trust him. He won't fumble in the playoffs. You know what I mean? Deontay Foreman is next. I've always liked Foreman. I thought he was really good for Carolina 2 years ago. He was solid against Chicago, for Chicago, not against Chicago, for Chicago last year. Wasn't as good as he was in Carolina, but I like his combination of size, power, and speed. I like his ability to run in between the tackles, and I like his ability in power running schemes. Buyer beware. We've got Austin Eckler, DeAndre Swift, and Kareem Hunt. Austin Eckler, I'm just worried that a team's going to overpay. He's really big in the fantasy community, but he is overrated, and it's just the case. He's not a great runner. He's never really been a great runner. He's a really, really good receiver. And that's what you need to get him for. But if you want him to be an every down back, you've got to be aware. DeAndre Swift is on there because he gets hurt a lot. And that's where you got to be like, buyer beware. You've got to manage his snaps. You've got to be willing to have another running back with him. But just understand, he's good. He's not great. He might not be worth the risk because he does get hurt a lot. He did stay healthy for the Eagles for the most part. But that's where the buyer beware comes in. Kareem Hunt, he's just not as good as he used to be. That's just a case of like, he didn't play that well last year. He's still a name. A lot of people will like him because like, oh, it's Kareem Hunt. We should sign him. He's a good pass catcher. He can run. He can do this. Yeah, a couple of years ago, he's not exactly the same guy he used to be. So Kareem Hunt is closer to like what Zeke is now, or maybe even worse than Zeke, to be honest with you. He's not the same guy that he used to be. So that's just a case of don't buy into the name, look at the production. All right, so those are your running backs. We're going to turn the page to the wide receiver position, which I know is very, very big in free agency. But that running back class right there, this running back class, that is one of the best running back classes in free agency history, baby. Like that is really good, especially those top 3 or 4 names. That's about as good as it gets for running backs. Wide receiver. Let's take a look at the wide receiver top 10. At number 1, I've got Michael Pittman Jr. So again, guys, thinking about age, productivity, and all that stuff, Michael Pittman is my number 1. Obviously, Mike Evans is the best if you want a guy for next year. But overall, I would say Michael Pittman. I really like Pittman's game. I'm also a little bit biased, or I lean into players that are good in all areas, on all levels, in all situations. I think Michael Pittman is a really good route runner. He's pretty underrated as a yards after catch threat. You can get him involved in the screen game. He's a good jump ball winner down the field. And he is a legit number 1 receiver. He's got good size. He can line up on the outside. He can do pretty much everything. So if your team needs a number 1 receiver who is not too old, who can last on kind of maybe a team that's middling or like just looking to upgrade that position, trying to give a spark. Michael Pittman could be that guy. I doubt he makes his way out of Indianapolis, but if he does, he could be potentially a big gain for a team. Mike Evans, obviously Hall of Famer, one of the greatest receivers in modern football history. He has yet to have a season without 1,000 yards. It speaks for itself. He's a Super Bowl champion. He's a high character player. He's a vertical threat, still has a lot of speed. He's still very tall, great hands, great in jump ball situations, great red zone threat, always leading the league in touchdowns or near the top in touchdowns. He's just really good. And honestly, I thought he looked better last year than the year before that. I think that was mostly due to injuries. But Mike Evans is awesome. I really don't think he's going to go somewhere, as Marky Mark says in the chat. I don't think he's going to go somewhere strictly to win. I think he's more about his family, his finishing his career, maybe a decent contract at the end. Like, I think he's about that. He's won his ring. He's done that. He's a Hall of Famer. He doesn't have much else to accomplish. He's just looking to finish his career well. I think he'll stay in Tampa, but I wouldn't be like shocked if he left, depending on what happens with Baker and stuff like that. At number 3, Calvin Ridley, who I think is almost definitely going to be on the market, which is why he's the picture. Calvin Ridley, I think there is a lot of potential here for him to be the best player in this group long term, depending on if he can, because think about it. He came back to football after missing an entire year. He was suspended for gambling, so obviously he wasn't in football shape no matter how good he looked when he entered training camp. But the thing with Calvin Ridley is he's still not old. He's had not a lot of wear and tear, not a lot of major injuries. There's been times throughout his career where he's been a legit X receiver, a legit number 1, a legit route runner on the outside, really refined route runner, really detailed. I think he was underutilized as Jacksonville's number 1 receiver last year. I thought that was a really bad, he still was productive. Like his stats are a little misleading in terms of his impact on the team, in my opinion. He had games where he was really, really good and really productive and really helped the team. But at other times, it felt like he was phased out of the offense. It was really odd. But Calvin Ridley could be a number 1 receiver, like a back-end number 1 receiver right now in the NFL. Marquise Brown is a guy with, he's a little inconsistent. So he's a little bit too inconsistent to be a number 1. But he's a really nice number 2. He's got a lot of speed. He can play in the slot. He's a vertical threat from the slot. He could play outside as well and run especially kind of outbreaking routes pretty well. And he's explosive. So if you want to pair maybe like a high-end possession receiver with a bit of speed, Marquise Brown could be your guy. I think he's going to go for a decent chunk of change. Curtis Samuel is the one that I really, really like here. I think he's super undervalued. Whatever I've seen from Curtis Samuel, I've always liked him. I thought he played really well for Washington when he got his opportunities. He's still super fast, twitchy, explosive. You can give him the ball as a running back. You can give him the ball on end arounds and little like touch passes and things like that. He can really work the middle of the field pretty well. And he's just like a multi-dimensional athlete that's a pretty good vertical threat as well. Tyler Boyd, I think, is maybe a little bit overvalued at this point in his career. I think his sweet spot was about 2-3 years ago, but he's been a pretty solid, reliable, high-end number 3 for the Bengals. The question is can he still be a number 2? That's kind of what teams will be looking at. If you're a team like the Chiefs, somebody like that, maybe you look at him in terms of like, oh, we need to bring in a veteran, reliable, can move the chains on third down, can play in the slot. That's the type of guy you might want to go for. Tyler Boyd has had a good career. He's just been playing behind 2 elite receivers in Cincinnati. Kendrick Bourne is one of my favorites for obvious reasons. He's got a ton of energy. His energy is infectious. The reason he's at 7 and maybe not 6 or 5 is because he got injured and he had a major injury this offseason. So I think that will actually drive his price down, which is when we talk about the undervalued players. That's where Kendrick Bourne will probably come in. But he was New England's best receiver since 2021. And I do put stock into that because he was basically their best threat. You know, Jacoby Myers was also there, and it was kind of like a 1A, 1B in 2021. But in 2023, he was having his best season of his career. He was always undervalued with San Francisco, playing behind the likes of, Deebo Samuel, Emmanuel Sanders, George Kittle in the offense. So Bourne is I think could go to a team and be a good veteran number 2 or like a high-end number 3, depending on what teams value him in terms of injuries. But he's a good all-around receiver, mostly an inside receiver, but is like a Z, which is like a number 2, can, not on the line of scrimmage as a number 1, but you can move him around and you can do a lot of different things with him. He's pretty good after the catch. Darnell Mooney, I've always liked. I think he's always been underrated. I think he's a vertical threat. He's got a lot of speed. I think he was misused and with a bad quarterback in Chicago for his skill set. I don't think him and Justin Fields really ever saw eye to eye on the field. I'm not saying they don't like each other. I'm just saying they didn't really pair up well. He did have a good season a couple of years ago, nearly 1,000 yards, I believe. And so I think he could be a really undervalued player because he's shown a lot of success in his past. But he's a good vertical route runner, and at the very least, he'll bring in a guy that can stretch the defense because of his speed. Josh Reynolds had a very productive season for the Lions as a number 3, but at times a number 2 receiver for one of the best offenses in the league. He could play inside or outside. He's pretty tall. He's about 6'2", and his hands were unreliable in the NFC Championship, but otherwise he was pretty darn good. I mean, he made a lot of plays for them on third down. Jared Goff seems to have a really good rapport with him, and he fits best in that type of offense, a McVay, Ben Johnson type of offense. Odell Beckham is my number 10. He's just old, but I actually think Odell could be undervalued right now because Odell is going to be coming off another year where he's healthy, right? The last time he was a free agent, he was coming off of a major tear in his knee where he had to take a lot of time to recoup and recalibrate. He took an entire season off of football. He played last year in Baltimore to chase a ring and get a championship, and he was a complimentary piece. He did at times show off his skill set still for his hands and his breakaway speed. I actually think he was better in Baltimore in terms of, near the end of the year, he looked pretty good. I think he could still be a number 2 or a good number 3 in this league. It depends, though, how much of that gas he can get back. But I'm thinking based on another season of health and having a full year to recalibrate and get his legs under him, I think that was a good thing for Odell. So that's the wide receivers. Guys, if you haven't already, spike the like button, hop in the chat and let me know your thoughts. And if you're watching this after the fact, let me know how I'm doing. Make sure to get those likes up. That's how the YouTube algorithm finds this content. All right, let's get to the tight end position. That is next. Tight end is not sexy this year, in my opinion. Hunter Henry and Dalton Schultz are, in my opinion, the best options on the market by a long shot. Hunter Henry is my personal favorite out of the two, although Dalton Schultz has been more productive the last couple of years. I personally think Hunter Henry has been less productive due to his situation. Instead of playing with Dak Prescott and CJ Stroud in Houston and Dallas, he's played in New England, and that speaks volumes. But I thought Hunter Henry was very good for New England this year at the tight end position, at times their most reliable option. He's not a go-to target in an offense, but as a number 3 target in an offense, he would be really good because he's really good on third down. If you don't put a lot of attention on him in the middle of the field, he can really work linebackers and safeties pretty effectively in his routes. He's got really consistent hands and makes a lot of difficult catches. He seems to be a really good guy in the locker room. He can block a little bit. He's not a great blocker, but he can play in line. And he's a really effective red zone threat. Dalton Schultz is similar, but a little bit different. I think Schultz is savvier. He's better in the short game, in running his routes, little stick routes and option routes and things like that. Schultz is very proficient in that area. He isn't explosive, though. I think Henry's honestly more explosive. He's bigger. He's stronger. I think Henry's a better athlete. Schultz is a little bit more of just like, he gets by with like route running and savviness, and he's got good hands. He's a good veteran, reliable option, and would be an upgrade on about 16 teams in the NFL at the tight end position. Noah Fant is a really good athlete that has never really been a great tight end, but he's always put up solid numbers. He can block pretty well. He's fast. He's pretty big. If you're looking for a traditional inline tight end, Noah Fant is a solid option. He can make explosive plays in the yards after catch department. Gerald Everett, I think, is a little bit overrated. He's had some good seasons. He's a good athlete. He can run. He's tall. He's big. He's played with LA, with the Chargers. He's played with the Rams. He's been mostly like a number 4 in an offense. That's probably the same as Noah Fant. You probably want him as like a number 4. He's not really a number 3 like Henry or Schultz. Gesicki, I've always liked. I didn't think New England used him all that well. I thought it was kind of a weird fit considering that Bill O'Brien, he did want him in New England because he tried to recruit him at Penn State, and I understand it. And I understand what they were going for, the 2 tight ends and all that stuff. But like Belichick doesn't like the type of tight end that Mike Gesicki is, so it just didn't really fit. Honestly, I think Mike Gesicki could be a really solid tight end for a team that doesn't really care about blocking, like the Bengals, for instance, or who's a team that doesn't really care about their tight end blocking. Like, he's just like a glorified receiver, but he's got solid speed. He's really tall. He's got great hands. He can run routes in the intermediate level really effectively. And he's a mismatch on a lot of different players because he's pretty quick and he's got decent speed. So Mike Gesicki is somebody to look for if your team doesn't really need a blocker at the tight end position. Austin Hooper, he's like a good number 2 veteran that can step in at any time and be a number 1. I've always liked Austin Hooper. I thought he looked really good in Tennessee a couple years ago. Last year in Vegas, he got kind of lost in the shuffle, didn't really provide a lot. But I still think he's a solid option as a number 2 tight end. He can do everything fairly well. Pharaoh Brown, I thought, played really well in New England. Super underrated player. I thought he was a great blocker for them and actually has a lot of gas. He can really run and make explosive plays. Drew Sample was a solid option for the Bengals. I don't know if I missed Tanner Hudson. I think Tanner Hudson is a free agent. I'm not sure. I don't remember. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Tanner Hudson would be on this list if he is, but I can't recall if he is or not. But Tanner Hudson is also an option if he is a free agent. I can't recall. I might have missed that one. That's my bad. But Drew Sample is from the Bengals as well. Him and Hudson split time as the number 1 tight end in Cincinnati. They're both fairly similar. Sample, he's an underneath threat. Runs like those, kind of like Schultz, runs those like stick routes, can get open, has reliable hands, not super effective, just he is whatever, but like he can play the role. Adam Troutman played a ton for Denver, not a receiver, but a good blocker, good second tight end. Colby Parkinson was the second tight end for Seattle, good athlete. They actually used him more than you would have thought, has great hair, so that's a big plus. So those are the top 10 tight ends in free agency. Probably about 3 to 4 starters, and the rest are mostly backups. In terms of the undervalued and the buyer beware players, Tanner Hudson. Oh, there he is. So he is a free agent. I do think he's undervalued. He just popped every time I watched the Bengals play. He made a few catches every game that were in high leverage situations, and I like those type of tight ends. Because typically, the tight end position in this NFL right now is not going to be your go-to receiver. I mean, there's maybe 2 teams in the NFL, maybe, that like have their feature weapon as their tight end, but not many. So you want a guy that can complement everybody else and run some solid routes, be where he needs to be, fit the system well, maybe block a little bit, catch the ball reliably, and then make a couple plays. And Hudson is that type of guy. I think you can sign him to a 1-year contract. He could be a receiving tight end. Pharaoh Brown is more of a number 2 tight end, but he's a really good blocker, and he can make some explosive plays. I talked about that. Mike Gesicki, I think, is undervalued because he's had really good moments in his career. And in terms of in Miami, I thought he had a number of good seasons. I think he racked up nearly 70 catches in a season before. He's, again, a glorified receiver that plays tight end, but he's more of a slot player, a move tight end. You can put him everywhere, outside, inside, slot. And he can run vertical routes. He's a good route runner, so he's undervalued for a team that needs a receiving option there and more of an explosive option than they have. Buyer beware, Gerald Everett. Just feel like he's been overvalued in the past, so I put him on the list. Not a lot to be said there. Irv Smith, I just think he sucks, honestly. Like, everyone keeps signing him. He's just terrible at football. And Dalton Schultz, they didn't overvalue him last year, but, like, buyer beware in terms of he had another productive season. He's had 2 productive seasons in a row. I could see a team maybe giving him, like, a 3-year contract where it's a little bit overvalued for... Because, like, teams didn't really value him last year, and he was the best tight end on the market last year pretty clearly. And it was kind of odd that they didn't give him that contract. So maybe a team this year is like, oh, Dalton Schultz, he was good again this year on a different team. Let's go out and give him some money to really be our number 1 tight end. And I just think you can get in trouble there because he's more of a complementary threat to an offense than a go-to option. He's at best a number 2 option in offense, but you really want him as your number 3. So those are the tight ends. Moving to the offensive line, which we've got to discuss. Gronk, spike the like button, guys. I'm going to continue to say it after every position. Gronk, spike the like button. Show your love. Show your support. We got free agency. It's free agency season on the BLV. If you're enjoying the content for free agency, let me know, man. Let me know. Free agency predictions are coming soon, including for some of these offensive linemen. So let's talk about the tackles in free agency. This is a decent class of tackles. Tyron Smith is number 1. Tyron Smith is the best tackle on the market. He was one of the best tackles in football. Once again, he is a Hall of Fame player, in my opinion. Trenton Brown, although I call him Trent Brown. I don't know why everyone calls him Trenton now. But Trenton Brown of the New England Patriots had a really good year when he played last year. But that's the thing. He is very unreliable, gets hurt, has issues off the field. But when he plays, he can be dominant, like truly a dominant player. So you've got to be in a good situation with a good coach, a good O-line coach, a good fit for him. Can a team figure that out? If you're a team that doesn't know what they're getting from Trent Brown, you don't want to sign him. Jonah Williams is a solid veteran tackle. He's nothing special. He does have first-round talent. Obviously was a first-round pick in his past. He could play left tackle or right tackle. He's a solid player, probably a little bit above average. He's nothing special, but he's good in the run game, good in the pass game. You're not really going to notice him on Sundays. Jermaine Illuminor, underrated tackle. He's been really good for the Raiders the last couple of years. Really reliable at right tackle. He strictly plays right tackle. He's more of a power run game based player. He played well for New England as well as a swing tackle in 2020. I really liked him, and I'm sad that we never brought him back. He went to the Raiders, and he became a pretty good player there. Donovan Smith was the left tackle of the Super Bowl champions. When he's allowed to hold, he's one of the best tackles in the NFL. When he's not allowed to hold, he's one of the worst tackles in the NFL. So it kind of depends on what ref crew you get on a given week. But Donovan Smith is still a starting level tackle in the NFL. He's not as good as he used to be. He's not as good as he was in Tampa Bay. He does take critical penalties at stupid times. So he's probably more valuable to Kansas City than other people because obviously Kansas City, they can coach up those tackles. George Fant at number 6 played pretty well for the Texans. Maybe had his best season, most consistent season of his career. He's more of a right tackle, but he's really good. He's got really good feet. He's really good in the run game. Can move well. And he's more of like a swing tackle, but he can play like as a starter if you need him to in a pinch. Chris Hubbard is the same thing. He played really well for Tennessee. Hubbard is more of a power player. He played right tackle in Tennessee. I believe he was a Steeler before that, maybe a Cardinal at other times throughout his career, but he's just really reliable. Like if you were looking for a reliable tackle, you don't have any other option, maybe you've got a rookie to pair him with, that'd be a good signing. Okarafor, whatever his name is, from Pittsburgh, he's been the starter there. I'm not even going to attempt his name, to be honest with you. He's been in Pittsburgh. He's been the starting right tackle for them for like 3 or 4 years. He got replaced this year. It feels like he's been there forever. He's always been underwhelming, and they've always needed to upgrade him. But he has started a lot, so I can say that about him. Kendall Lamb actually had a decent season with Tennessee this year. Again, comes from that Tennessee scheme, so he's more of a power-based run game player. I think he's a swing tackle or like a Chris Hubbard type where he can compete for a starting job on a lower-end offensive line, but you don't really want him playing as a starter. And then David Quessenberry, I added to the end of the list as well. He's a right tackle. Again, a player that's like a good swing tackle, a reliable off-the-bench option. You don't really want him as your starter. Those are your tackles. Tackles are tough because you're going to have to spend money to get a good one. That's just the way offensive line is in the NFL. It's easy to find defensive linemen, but when it comes to offensive linemen, you've got to really value those top-notch guys. You really got to pay those guys because they're hard to find. When it comes to the value of these tackles, Jermaine Illuminor I have as an undervalued option. I've liked him for years. Ever since I saw him play in New England, they got him from Baltimore in a trade, of course, because Baltimore just finds offensive linemen off the street at the local Burger King. What's up, BK? Jermaine Illuminor has just been good ever since. Cornelius Lucas, who is mostly been a backup throughout his career, but has played fairly well throughout his career when he's been asked to step in and be a starter. So that's a guy that maybe has not gotten quite the opportunity to be a full-time starter, that maybe deserves a chance or could be had for cheap and maybe could compete for a starting job. Chris Hubbard is just an older version of a Cornelius Lucas type of player where he's always been mostly thought of as a swing tackle. He did start this past year for Tennessee, played pretty well. And there just seems to be guys like that every year who play at a solid, steady level that are undervalued on the offensive line. I'd rather have a guy like that than going out and spending big-time money on an inconsistent player. And that's why I have Trent Brown at buyer beware. Trent Brown's buyer beware because you've got to find the right fit. If you find the right fit and you find the right team and the right offensive line coach and the right offense and the right situation, you might have a Pro Bowler on your hands. So maybe he comes in and he gets signed to a 2-year contract for a bunch of money. But if it's the right fit, it will work and you'll love it. If you're the Chiefs and you want to upgrade Donovan Smith and you know Andy Reid will get the most out of Trent Brown, that might be a great signing for you. But if you're the Cardinals, I don't know if you'd want to do that. If you're the bad team, okay? Jonah Williams, the buyer beware comes in. You don't want to pull like a Nate Solder near the end of his career where it's a tackle in his 30s who was a first-round pick, who had a good career, but he's not great. I think Williams is maybe late 20s. I could be wrong about that. But he's a good player. He's not a great player. And that's the case of paying a good tackle great money. And I wouldn't do that. Donovan Smith, just because he holds a lot, he takes a lot of penalties, he's not the same player he was in Tampa. And people are going to look at him like they did with Andrew Wiley last year, where Andrew Wiley got a ludicrous contract from the Commanders. They're like, oh, this guy won the Super Bowl on the Chiefs. Let's sign him to a $1,000,000,000 contract. No, that's not exactly a good idea in my opinion. So those are the undervalued. Those are the buyer beware at tackle. Moving to the guard position. The guards, I actually think this is a really quality guard class. So if you're looking for interior help on your offensive line, you're in luck. Mike Onwenu, I have listed as a guard. I think he, at the guard position, is the best player in this class. He can also play right tackle, which gives him added flexibility and versatility. So that makes him the best because him and Robert Hunt are the gems here. I think they're arguably, other than Tyron Smith, the best players in free agency on the offensive line. So they should get good contracts. And the thing I love about Onwenu and Hunt, just putting them collectively, they're both power-based players, which I prefer. They're both downhill monsters. They're both dominant pass blockers. They can just hold up and not let you go anywhere. Onwenu is a really good run blocker. Hunt has shown that he has versatility in multiple schemes, but has been really effective as a zone blocker for McDaniel in Miami. Onwenu has played right tackle. He's played right guard. I think he might have played left guard at some point. Robert Hunt has played, I think, a little bit of right tackle, a little bit of guard. But love both players. I think both deserve big money contracts. Both have been exceptionally healthy, especially Hunt when you consider, Robert Hunt hasn't gotten injured as much as some of the other Miami offensive linemen, but I think he got injured maybe this year. So those two are the clear top two, in my opinion, the class of the guard market. Jonah Jackson is next. Jonah Jackson's a really good player. He made the Pro Bowl, I think, last year or the year before. At some point, he made the Pro Bowl. But he's a good starting guard. I don't think he's, great, but he's very good. I thought he had a really good year this year for Detroit. And really good run blocker. Has just been a homegrown talent for Detroit that's really turned out to be a very reliable, very good player. Those are the type of players in their mid-20s. Onwenu, Hunt, Jackson, they're all about 27, I want to say. So I would look to sign any one of those guys. I really like that combination of age, the stability, the consistency of their play. Jonah Jackson is number 3. Kevin Dotson is number 4. He was maybe arguably the best on this list this year. PFF ranked him as a top 5 guard in the NFL this year. But this was really his best season of his career by a long shot. He's mostly been inconsistent, and I think I chalk a lot of that up to he played in LA with Sean McVay's offense, Sean McVay's scheme. McVay seems to get a lot out of those guards and offensive linemen and puts them in good positions, advantageous positions for athletic guys that can move in space but aren't great pass blockers and don't have great anchors in the pass blocking department. So Dotson, I'd worry a little bit about regression and paying too much for, but I think he's a good player. Kevin Zeitler, he's just getting old. Really good player, but he's getting old. If you're a contender and you need an upgrade in your guard position, I would look at Zeitler. If I was a younger team that was looking to, replenish my offensive line, I wouldn't look at Kevin Zeitler. Graham Glasgow played amazing for Detroit this year. As he's usually been a fringe starter backup, high-end backup type guy. But this year he came into Detroit. Vaitai got hurt once again. Glasgow filled in, and he was phenomenal. He can play center. He can play guard. Great versatility. You guys know I love versatility as a Patriots fan. Damian Lewis, I've liked for a long time from Seattle. Good run blocker. Struggles a little bit as a pass blocker at times, but he's a good power player. Honestly, I think he could go to somewhere like Baltimore and really succeed and be an upper echelon player. I think he still has potential. Greg Van Roten is a veteran who had the best year of his career. Roten, I believe, not Rotten, sorry. Greg Van Roten, he played in Buffalo. Then they signed him in Las Vegas as kind of a depth piece, but he actually developed into a starter for them and graded as his best year of his career. So maybe he was in the wrong scheme. Maybe him going from somewhere like Buffalo and maybe Carolina, I think he played in Carolina, don't quote me on that, to the Raiders, maybe that changed the perspective. I think he might be more valuable to the Raiders than he is on other teams, though. Dalton Reisner has just been a good player wherever he's gone, just very solid starter. He actually was signed as a backup for Minnesota, like Graham Glasgow 2.0, basically. He can play center, he can play guard. If we get an injury, we can put him in. And basically, someone got hurt for Minnesota. he ended up playing, and then they were like, oh, this guy's actually pretty good. Let's just trade Ezra Cleveland. Let's get a pick for Ezra Cleveland, and let's start Dalton Risner. So Risner had a good year last year. I think he's in his younger 30s. Ezra Cleveland is next. Basically got replaced by Dalton Risner, but he got dished out for picks. Ezra Cleveland has potential. He's in his mid-20s, but he's had some good seasons. PFF has pretty much graded him as like a top 30 guard in pretty much every year he's played, so he's had good success. He's more of a zone player than a power blocker, but good feet, solid pass blocker, solid player. I don't think he's great, but he's got potential. Maybe unlike some of the guys ahead of him, but maybe a little bit of a down year last year as compared to the years previous. So that's the guard position. At the buyer beware and the undervalued guards in free agency, we got Graham Glasgow because he's got really, really great versatility. He was really great last year on a really good offensive line, can play center or guard at a high level, and can be a starter on pretty much any team at either position. John Flanciano of the 49ers was their starting right guard this year, played at a very high level. He's a little bit older. He's a veteran, but he can be had for cheap. And he got injured in the Super Bowl, which really, really hurt them. And his value showed up in the fourth quarter. Aaron Stinney. I've always been a fan of Aaron Stinney. They had an injury at guard to Matt Filer this year. He stepped in once again. He actually replaced, I believe it was Alex Kappa in the Super Bowl. Was it Alex Kappa or Ali Marpet? Can't remember in that Super Bowl year for Tampa Bay, but he was good for them in Tampa whenever he's had to step in as a good backup. So I like those type of players. Buyer beware, Ezra Cleveland. He's younger. He's had pretty good seasons, but he's never shown the ability to be great, which makes him, in my opinion, a buyer beware because his age could get him maybe overvalued in the market. Well, I'd prefer just signing somebody like Graham Glasgow to like a 1-year contract. Andrus Peat, who's always been a bit overrated because he was overdrafted. And Kevin Dotson, who I said had the best season of his career, and you've got to be worried a little bit about regression. Not that he's not a great player or didn't have a great season, but he could have had his best season of his career, and you don't want to pay him for that. You want to pay him for the future, right? So, but the one thing I'll say positively about Andrus Peat, he can play tackle as well as guard. He's just never been great at either position. He's just fine. The next position, we're looking at the centers. I'm going to spend a little bit less time on center just because there's not a lot of good ones this year. Jason Kelce. If he's not doing his podcast and wants to return to football, he is a free agent. Connor Williams is number 2. He got signed by Miami, I believe, 2 off seasons ago and proved to be a really good center, moving from guard in Dallas to center in Miami and became a top 10 center in football. He's a really good pickup for teams that need a center. I think he's a top 10 center. He's under 30, so it would be a good signing. Andre James, I think, has been always underrated for the Raiders. Good run blocker. Tyler Biadasz for the Cowboys. Solid player. I like to call him Tyler Badass. He's got a little bit of an edge to him, but he did play alongside Zach Martin and some good offensive players in Dallas. And we've just seen at times these Dallas offensive linemen can be a little bit overvalued because of the players around them on the line or the coaching there. So just be careful with that one. Lloyd Cushenberry had his best season of his career in Denver as the center in Sean Payton's offense. He is trending up and he's still young. Aaron Brewer started for Tennessee at center, solid run blocker. Mason Cole has played everywhere at this point, can be a fringe starter / backup, high-end backup. Connor McGovern, a veteran that has had really good seasons in his history, but had a really bad season last year. So maybe you take a chance on him. He can be a starting center. Cody Whitehair can play guard or center. He's had Pro Bowl history in his past, but had a really rough season last year, struggled a bit, but has some upside, kind of like McGovern, where they didn't have their best season last year, but maybe that was due to a variety of different reasons. You never really know, so you could take a chance on them. Next, we're talking about the undervalued and the buyer beware centers. So first, I want to point out that Will Clapp, the best name in the NFL, is on my buyer beware section just because you've got to deal with the memes of Will Clapp if you want to sign him. Tyler Biadasz, I brought up the opinion on him. I think he's a solid center. I don't think he's great. He's got great players around him, which I think maybe make him look better than he is. And he's a Cowboy, which might have a little bit more of a name value attached to him than other players. Did I skip Evan Brown? Sorry. Evan Brown, center, Seattle, played in Detroit, can play guard, can play center. He's a backup. Sorry about that. Nolan, he's a backup that can be a starter. He was a starter for Seattle last year, was a backup in Detroit, played well as a backup, but struggled as a starter in Seattle a little bit. Jason Kelce, buyer beware, because you've got to deal with the Taylor Swift propaganda. Undervalued. Lloyd Cushenberry coming off his best season of his career. He's young. Andre James, just a good player. Just think he's underrated, generally. Good center that I think won't get paid a lot of money. Connor McGovern, I've always liked him. I just think he's coming off a bad year. And Cody Whitehair, I'd also say maybe undervalued as well. So those are the guys at center. Now let's switch to the defensive side of the football. Defense. If you guys haven't already, Gronk, spike the damn like button. All right, let's get those likes up, baby. We're trying to make this BLV free agency season a great season. So join me, man. Join me. Let's get to 100 likes on this video. Let's get to 100 likes on this video. And I don't know. Caesar can give me the next video topic. 100 likes, baby. Let's go. 100 likes. All right, next position. Let's go to defense. So first position on defense is interior defensive lineman. Obviously, Chris Jones is number one. If you've never heard of him, you've been living under a rock. Every big game he plays in and nearly every single big down he plays in, he seems to make a play. So Chris Jones is one of, in my opinion, this is not an exaggeration, one of the greatest defensive linemen in the history of the NFL, period. Okay? Justin Madubuike. I thought it was Madubuike for the first 3 years of his career, but in fact, it is Madubuike. So I apologize to Justin for the past 3 years of NFL analysis, but he had one of the best seasons in the NFL on the defensive line among all players. He was the leading pass rush artist of the Ravens from the interior. He reminds me of Grady Jarrett in his stature. He's got really violent hands, can get inside. He's really twitchy and quick, but also an effective run player. He is in his prime and therefore could actually even get more money than Chris Jones potentially, although I doubt it, but it's possible. He is an all-around D-tackle. I actually think he might be better if he leaves Baltimore because he might be a better, more effective pass rusher in a different front than Baltimore typically runs. They definitely could tag him, though. I think they will. Christian Wilkins. If you're looking for an absolute stud of a power run defender, Christian Wilkins, he is unreal. Okay, Christian Wilkins has been the best run stuffer in the NFL according to Run Stops, PFF's Run Stops stat. I believe the last 2 years in a row. He was last year. I think he was up there this year. Wilkins is a great player. I really like Christian Wilkins, and I think he could get paid a ton. That's going to be a player that a lot of casual NFL fans are like, what? Christian Wilkins got paid that much? Yeah, he did. He's good. Leonard Williams. Always been a Leonard Williams fan. If you've followed the BLV for a while, you kind of know what I think of him. He's a great pass rusher. He's got extraordinary traits, very long arms, really good inside, can play pretty much everywhere on the defensive line from nose tackle to edge. He's got really freaky twitch for a guy of his length and size. And Seattle traded for him during the middle of the year. Don't think they're going to re-sign him, so he's going to be open on the market. DJ Reader. You got to be careful of this one. He's getting a little bit older, and but he's not super old. I will say that he is in, I think, his prime. I think he's like 27 or 28, but he's coming off like an Achilles tear. So that's a terrible injury for a nose tackle, especially a guy that is mostly a run stuffer. So you don't get a lot from him in terms of pass rushing, but he's a great run defender and sorely missed on Cincinnati when he didn't play. Grover Stewart's a great run defender, not much of a pass rusher. Did get busted for roids, so that is something this year, but has been really good alongside DeForest Buckner in Indianapolis. Very underrated player. Daquan Jones had one of the best seasons of his career in Buffalo this year. He got hurt in the middle of the year, but he came back for the playoffs, so he's going to be fresh for whichever team he goes to. Good player. I'd like him as my number 2 D tackle, more so than my number 1, though, at this point in his career. Sheldon Rankins, I thought, had a really underrated season for the Texans. Really good all-around player. Just not, like, great in any area. But if you're looking for a solid number 2 D tackle that can stop the run effectively, that can rush the quarterback effectively, thought he had a number of games where he stood out for the Texans. And they had a good run defense, too. Fletcher Cox, good rotation player at this point in his career. Played probably too much for the Eagles last year. But still, I think he had 7 sacks. He's not the Hall of Fame caliber player he was earlier in his career, but he's still really good, or at least in a rotation role. Shelby Harris has always played in a rotation role, but he had one of his better years of his career in Cleveland, playing alongside Dalvin Tomlinson, Myles Garrett. He's just a really solid player. I think he's a better pass rusher than he is a run defender, but he actually had a pretty good year as a run defender last year. This is an excellent defensive tackle class. This might be the best group of players in the entire free agency. When you look at high-end defensive linemen, I mean, Chris Jones, Justin Madubuike, Christian Wilkins, those are elite D tackles. And then Leonard Williams, DJ Reader, Grover Stewart, Daquan Jones are like really, really good players. So like 6 or 7 of these guys would be on my top 25 D tackles in the NFL. That's how good this group is. So yeah, that's a pretty good group of players on the defensive tackles. Yes, roids, Caesar. Don't think the Eagles bring back Fletch, says Nolan. You don't think so? I mean, maybe. We'll see. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe he goes to Cleveland this year with Schwartz. Nolan says, I could see Leonard Williams going to Philly. Ooh, I don't think so. I don't think Philly has the money to spend on D-line. I think they need to spend it on linebacker and secondary. Seth says, if he stays with Baltimore, what's that? What are you talking about, Seth? Markey says, Madubuike got to get re-signed by their team. And Chris Jones, yes. I mean, yeah, preferably for those teams, you would like to see them re-sign those players. Next up, in terms of undervalued and buyer beware, we've got Maurice Hurst of the Cleveland Browns. I've always liked Maurice Hurst. He's been undervalued throughout his entire career because of off-the-field issues and kind of a lack of stability in his off-the-field. And that has made him an up-and-down player. There's been times where he's been cut. There's been times where he's been awesome. I thought he had his best year of his career last year. He was low-key one of the best rotation defensive linemen in football for one of the best defenses in football in Cleveland last year. He's a perfect complement as a pass rusher to a good, edge player on a team. So Maurice Hurst is probably not a guy that you would want, although I think he could start for a defensive line. You would love to have him as your third defensive tackle in your rotation. And I'd pay pretty premium money to have that guy on my team as a defensive tackle, pass rushing specialist. Javon Kinlaw, I really liked how Kinlaw played for San Francisco last year. He struggled throughout the early portion of his career, but Kinlaw last year I thought was the best he's been all career. So if you want to get a guy that's just hitting his stride now, former first-round pick, showed up in the NFC Championship, showed up in the playoffs. Actually, I thought outplayed some of the other defensive linemen on San Francisco in the playoffs. I think Kinlaw is a guy that's just hitting his peak now. You can get him maybe for cheaper than he's worth. Adam Butler of the Raiders, former Patriot, Super Bowl champion, came back to football this year after having some health concerns in his off-the-field life, but Adam Butler is just an excellent pass rushing stunt guy. Like in that type of scheme, like I could see him going to Minnesota and putting up 6 sacks. He's a guy that you put him on a team, you put him in a defensive, pass rushing situation where he can run stunts, he can loop around people. He's just really savvy, really smart, and he finds a way to get to the quarterback. He delivers about 5-6 sacks a year when you put him in that type of situation. Buyer beware. DJ Reader, just because of the Achilles injury. Grover Stewart, just because he's a little bit older and he's coming off a suspension. Daquan Jones, because, and again, a guy that's hurt and coming off probably the best year of his career. At least, as of late, the best year of his career. So 3 guys that are, for different reasons, a little bit concerning. I still think they're good players and worth signing. I just think they're maybe going to regress this next season. Malia, it's Malia, right? Sorry, Malia. Says, Kansas City have to sign him to a contract. They got to sign Chris Jones. If they don't, I'll take him in New England. How about that? All right, let's get to the next position. That was the last one. The edge position, which if defensive tackle isn't the best position in free agency, edge is the best position in free agency. If you guys haven't already, Gronk, spike the like button. Show some love for Josh Allen, Danielle Hunter, Brian Burns, and company. This is such a good position that you could make an argument that 3 players are the best player at this position entering free agency. Josh Allen. I love Josh Allen. I think he's a great player. I think he's a great quarterback for the Buffalo Bills, but he's also a great edge rusher for the Jacksonville Jaguars. What I like about Josh Allen is he's a finesse edge pass rusher. He's got really good bend around the corner. He's similar to, like, in my opinion, you know what he is? He's like a poor man. He's really good. Don't get me wrong. But he's like a poor man's version of TJ Watt. That's what he is. So if you haven't really watched Josh Allen play that much, that's what he is. He's a guy that can rush the passer, get around the edge, use twitch, use finesse, use bend to get to the quarterback, but he can drop back in coverage. He's solid against the run. He's probably a better pass rusher than he is a run defender, and he's just really good at making plays. Strip sacks, interceptions, tipped passes. He just makes a lot of plays. He's the best Jacksonville defender by far on their team. They can't let him go. Danielle Hunter has been one of the best defensive linemen in the NFL for years. The reason he's not number 1 is his age. You look at his career. I'm just going to pull up his stats, to be fair. I don't even really know how old he is. I want to say he's like 32 at this point. But, he's 29. Okay, he's not even that old. I thought he was, he's been in the NFL since he was 21. And you look at his stats, right? He's had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons of 10 or more sacks, and then he's never had less than 6 sacks in a year, and that came in a year where he played 7 games. So Danielle Hunter is really freaking good. All right, he has 4 seasons of 12.5 sacks or more, and what I love about Danielle Hunter is he's a freak first. He's super strong. He's got really good mix of bend and strength at the point of attack. He can play in pretty much any defense, right? That was something I was concerned about when he played this year. He played in Brian Flores' scheme. He's played in Mike Zimmer's scheme. He's played in every scheme known to man. He could play inside. He could play outside. He's a really good player. The only thing is, right, he's coming off of a 16.5 sack season, which is the best of his career, his 4th Pro Bowl campaign. He's turning 30. So he's like, are you really going to be getting the best when you're going to have to pay top-notch money? That's the only thing. That's why he's 2nd, not 1st. Brian Burns is 3rd because as opposed to Josh Allen is kind of just hitting his prime. Josh Allen is And, of course, it gives me the quarterback. Where's the pass rusher? Josh Allen is 26, okay? And he's coming off a 17.5 sack season, right? Brian Burns is number 3. I've always been a Brian Burns fan. I think Brian Burns is a very good football player. He's more of a pass rusher than he is a run defender. He always has been. He's known for his unique blend of quickness at the line to be able to kind of get off the ball quickly, his first couple steps, and then his bend to get around the corner. He has got really long arms, which makes him a potent pass rusher at stripping the ball and getting around the corner. And he didn't have his best year this year. I definitely think he had a tough year this season. But even in that regard, like, he had, like, still good numbers. He's only 25 years old, which is kind of insane to think about. He got drafted at 21. He's 25 now. It feels like he's been in the league for 6 years because he's been in the league for 5 years, right? So he's never had worse than 7.5 sacks. This past season, he had 8. Last year, he had 12.5. He's a 2-time Pro Bowler. Brian Burns is a really good player. He's going to go for huge money. He's 25 years old, and he's a premier pass rusher. Jonathan Greenard is coming off an excellent season in DeMeco Ryans' defense. He is also pretty young, so you're thinking about a guy that I think he's like 27, 26. He had 12.5 sacks this past year in 15 games. He had 8 sacks 2 seasons ago. So he's shown 2 seasons in 2 different defenses to have 12.5, 8 sacks. He is more of a traditional, what you think of like a 4-3 defensive end. He's more of that type of player. He's a good pass rusher. He's not quite the tier of Brian Burns, Danielle Hunter, Josh Allen. He's right underneath that. He needs a season or 2 more of like consistency for me to really put him in that category. But he's ascending. I do think he's a really strong number 2 pass rusher on a team, if not a number 1. Zadarius Smith is the guy that played as this really strong number 2 this past season in Cleveland. Had another great year. Who would have thought? Not me, of course, doing the meme of Ant-Man. But, Zadarius Smith, he's been my guy for years. He's a good player still. He didn't have as many sacks as you would have thought. He only had 5.5, but he's still really good. He can play in any system. He can get around the corner, bend the edge. He's really powerful. He's really good with his hands. He's really good on blitzing and stunts up front. He's had 3 10-plus sack seasons, 1 in Minnesota, 2 in Green Bay. He just played in Cleveland. He played in Baltimore. He's been productive in every single stop he's played. He's only 31. He feels like he's older, but he's not. Chase Young is number 6. Chase Young, for many, will probably be above Zadarius Smith just due to the age. There's an argument for that. It's just the inconsistencies for me with Chase Young. Chase Young was a bit inconsistent for the Niners. I thought he played really well in Washington for a majority of the start of the season. What I don't love about Chase Young is his name is very big, but his productivity has been good, not great. He's a good, not great pass rusher. He mostly utilizes, his power to get to the quarterback as an edge rusher, and I prefer guys that are bendy and can kind of like turn the corner. He's not that type of player, but he's good. Right? And he proved that he could come back from serious injury and be productive this year. And he was really good in his rookie season. Bryce Huff. Thank God it's not Bryce Young. Bryce Huff is number 7. Really awesome pass rusher. If you're talking about a guy that you want as a 3rd edge rusher in your rotation, a guy that you can put in the game on 3rd down and to affect the quarterback on passing downs, or any situation where you think a team might throw the ball, Bryce Huff is a stud, okay? He is that bendy, quick. He is a nightmare, okay? Leonard Floyd, really good season for the Bills this past year. A little bit quiet when it came to the playoffs, but I felt like Leonard Floyd once again proved his worth on another team this season. He's played for, at this point, Chicago, LA, Buffalo, and in the past 4 seasons in a row, he has 9 or more sacks. So in LA, he had 10.5, 9.5, 9. In Buffalo, he came in. He was signed to a relatively cheap contract. I think it was a 1-year deal. He put up 10.5 sacks, which is tied for his career high. He's 31. He's not that old. He's the same age as Zadarius Smith. Could still be a great number 2 pass rusher for a team. If not, again, you know, a solid enough number 1 if you've got a really good interior player. Number 9 is Denico Autry, who I love. He had 12 sacks, I think, this year. I've always loved Denico Autry. The only thing is I think he's like 33 or 34. He can play inside or outside, and he is great with power. The thing is, he's more of a specific fit. Although he's played in Indianapolis, I think he played in Cleveland. Or maybe I'm wrong. I'm thinking, you know who I think of when I think of, this is just a side note. You know who I think of when I think of Denico Autry? I think of Jabal Sheard. I don't know why. Anyone, Patriots fans know who that is. But Denico Autry, he's big, he's powerful, he's got super long arms. He can play D tackle or edge. And he was the leading sacker on Tennessee this year. He's a really good player. Autry played for the Titans, and Autry played for the Colts, I think, right? Am I wrong about that? Anyways, the last guy is Andrew Van Ginkel. Andrew Van Ginkel, you might laugh at his name. It's the funniest name on the list. You might laugh at his hair. You might laugh at him because he's a white guy that looks like value meal Clay Matthews in 2010. But he's a good player, really good. He can rush the quarterback. He can drop in coverage. In fact, he had the best coverage among all edge players in the NFL, coverage grade in the NFL. He can drop in coverage and make plays. He can strip sack you. I love Van Ginkel. I think if you can get him for cheap as a number 3 edge rusher, I think he's a starter, but like you could probably get him on a 2-3 year contract for like solid money. Think of like a Kyle Van Noy-esque player. That's to me like Andrew Van Ginkel, maybe with a little bit more edge rushing prowess. He's a good player. I like him. I like him a lot. All right, let's move to the next position, which is the linebacker position. This is also a pretty good group. By the way, the edge position is stacked. Like, I could go on like 40 names on that list. But linebackers. So Frankie Louvu is my number 1. I think he's the best all-around linebacker. And he's only 27. For some reason, I thought Frankie Louvu was like 34. I don't know why, but like, I just did, I guess. I guess he plays like he's 34. Frankie Louvu, though, he can rush the quarterback. He can blitz. He can play edge or inside. He can cover. He can stop the run. He can do everything. He's a great player. He's a top 10 linebacker probably in the NFL. Patrick Queen, good player. You wonder how much scheme specific he is. Because he played in Baltimore with Mike McDonald, who got the most out of pretty much every player there. But he's super athletic. He's super fast. He did show better ability in coverage and range in coverage. He's a really good blitzer. So those things are important. Levante David might be number 1 on this list, but he's just old. And I don't know if he's going to leave Tampa because he's just comfortable in Tampa. But he's a Hall of Famer, Super Bowl champ, incredible high IQ. I mean, you could still tell he was playing at a super high level when he played Detroit in the playoffs. He was phenomenal in that game. He's a great run defender, great sideline to sideline. Not quite as good as he used to be in coverage, but still competent. He's much better than Bobby Wagner at this point in a comparative stage in their career. Jerome Baker is next. I like Jerome Baker. I always have. He's really fast. He's a downhill backer. He can get after it as a blitzer. A little bit inconsistent in terms of his run defense, but I think he played well last year. And I think he fits a lot of different schemes, but more of like the 3-4-esque type of defenses. Although, you know, a lot of teams don't play base 3-4 anymore, but you know what I mean. Like the 3-man front defensive lines. He's better in those type of defenses. Jordan Hicks was really good for Minnesota. I kind of questioned that signing for them last year. But, man, this guy's just a good player. Like I said last year on my linebacker rankings, and I remember saying this because it's like clear as day. It felt like yesterday in my mind. But, like, I put him on the list. I was like, I don't care that the guy's like 33. He's just really good every year. Like, he's just, like, at a certain point, you've just got to, like, give the guy the nod. You know what I mean? Like, Jordan Hicks, you thought that he capped out, but he just keeps playing at a very steadily high level. He's very smart, and he's good in all areas of the game. He can cover well. He's good as a run defender, and he's a good blitzer, and he's just very smart, and he calls the checks of the defense. Good player, man. I really like Jordan Hicks. He used to play for the Eagles a long time ago. Aziz is, I think, a low-key name that might be higher on my list than a lot of others. He used to be on the Niners. He was the third linebacker on the Niners. He played for Tennessee last year. He was their best linebacker. He's very fast. I think he's what a lot of teams look for in a linebacker nowadays. He's got great range. He's downhill. He does not give a living F on his body or any regard. He's just going to throw himself at the ball. He can cover a lot of ground quickly. Love those type of linebackers. He is that type of guy. Tyrell Dodson had a breakout year, as Nolan points out in the comments. Dodson is a really, really solid player. I thought actually was shockingly good for Buffalo. He, I think, graded as like the best linebacker for PFF last year. So that's all I have to really say. Josie Jewell is next. Josie Jewell is like a solid linebacker at this point. Doesn't really have any weaknesses. Really smart, high IQ. Still not too old, but he's a steady veteran that if your team desperately needs a reliable linebacker, Josie Jewell is that guy. Bobby Wagner is next. Wagner, why I have him at 9 and not like 6, like maybe some other people do, is his coverage. He's just not that twitchy, fast, quick anymore. So I very much value coverage, and I very much value affecting the pass game. And Wagner is still very, very, very smart. He's a good blitzer, and he's not a great blitzer. He's a good blitzer, and he's good against the run. I just worry about his age, his deterioration, and you could just pick on him in coverage, in my opinion, at this point in his career. Blake Cashman is number 10, which might shock a lot of people because they probably don't know who this is. Okay, I knew Blake Cashman like 4 years ago from Madden because he had like 90 speed in Madden, and he was on the Jets, and he was a special teamer. He goes to Houston. He gets signed as like their 5th linebacker. He ends up playing for the Texans in a starting role this year and ends up being their, one of their best players on defense. He was very, very good. He uses his twitch, his speed, sideline to sideline to tackle ball carriers. He's obviously got range and coverage. So he makes for a very good traditional 4-3, like weak side linebacker. That type of guy that can cover in zone and make up for a lot of ground in the run game. So Cashman was one of those I had to include. There's a lot of good linebackers in free agency, though, as Malia already brought up in her comments. She says that Willie Gay and Tranquil, also free agents, hope they stay with Kansas City. I'm going to bring up at least one of those guys right now in terms of my undervalued assets. It was hard to leave, especially Drew Tranquil, off this list. But I definitely thought going into making the list, I was going to have both of them on the list. But I was just surprised how many good linebackers are in free agency. So if you're a Cowboys fan or an Eagles fan, you're in luck. Sorry, that is not the right one. Looking at this one is the linebacker position. Undervalued, Drew Tranquil. There he is. I love Drew Tranquil. I have for a while. He actually shocked me, though, in terms of what he was able to do for Kansas City. Honestly, I thought he was like more of a cover guy in LA. Like, he was a really steady cover guy in the middle of their defense. And all of a sudden, you see him in Kansas City, and he's playing near the line of scrimmage. He's setting the edge. He's blitzing. He's rushing the quarterback. I mean, like, what? I was like, what? This is Drew Tranquil? Like, this looks like Willie McGinnis, not Drew Tranquil. But, you know, Nathan Landman had a very good season for Atlanta. He's especially a really good fit for blitzing defenses. Put up a lot of pressures for Atlanta last year. Good run defender. I think he ranked near the top in run defense. And then, of course, I threw Blake Cashman in there. Although I could have put another backer in there like Anthony Walker from Cleveland, or even Taki, I believe is his name. How do you say his name? From Cleveland. Or even Willie Gay. I could have put any of those guys in this category, but I wanted to give Blake Cashman that shout out, make sure I talked about him. But there's so many good linebackers, guys. If you need a linebacker, especially one that can do a lot of different things, there's a lot of different types. Buyer beware, Devin White. I love Devin White. As a personality, as a guy, I think he's had great moments in his NFL career. He's just the most inconsistent player you've ever watched in the NFL in the history of football. One week, he will be the best linebacker you've seen since Ray Lewis, and the next week, he will be CFL caliber. And you'll be like, why is this guy playing? So you can really not afford to pay this guy a lot of money. It would be stupid. Because he's just not one of those guys that it feels like you can pay a lot of money to. Bobby Wagner, just because of his age, and I think he's name brand, right? He's just a name brand, you know, like he's a good player, but you could go out and get a Blake Cashman for probably $7 million less, right? Jordan Brooks, I think is an effective run defender from Seattle and good athlete. He's a good athlete. You know why he screams Philly? Because he looks almost exactly like Michael Kendricks. If you know who that is, you know what I'm talking about. Look up Jordan Brooks and look up Michael Kendricks, and you'll see the same player. But Jordan Brooks is a good run defender, good athlete, really good athlete. Dealt with some injuries, can't cover to save his freaking life. Okay, that's a problem. So, yeah. Let's get to the safety position. That's next. Oh, no, corners are next. Okay, never mind. Quarterback, baby! One of my favorite positions in the NFL. L'Jarius Sneed has an argument to be a top 3 corner in football, if not the best corner in the NFL last year. He is the number 1 corner in free agency. He can play in any scheme. Man, zone, doesn't matter. 2 deep, 1 deep, split safety, blitz, man, zone. I said that already. You want him to play nickel. You want him to play outside. You want him to play the number 1. You want him to play the slot. He can do it. He can do it. He is a rare breed. He is the best corner in free agency. Jalen Johnson, not too far off as one of the best corners in the NFL last year. Excellent player. Really good. This year, I thought he showed prowess in man in a way that I didn't think he really had. Previously, he was pretty much just a zone corner, but he can do both. He's really good in press coverage and really savvy, really smart. Baits quarterbacks really well. One of the 10 best corners in the NFL. So 2 top 10 guys, in my opinion, in this class. Xavier Howard has been up and down, but when you get him at his best, he can be a top 10 corner in the league. He's obviously more of a press man corner. And so I think him going to a press man corner system would be advantageous for him. I would say he's more of a number 2 than a number 1 at this point, but he's a great ball hawk as well. Kendall Fuller is a really good all-around corner. He can play inside, outside, really smart player. He could probably play free safety as well. I think he might have earlier in his career, but Fuller is just a classic case of he's a smart football player. He gets it, and he would be an upgrade for a lot of teams. If you're a zone-based team, you would want to sign Kendall Fuller. Stephon Gilmore, one of my favorite players in the NFL, one of my favorite corners of all time. At one point was the best corner in the NFL in 2018 and 2019. He's now in his early 30s. And he could play in any defense. I think he's pretty much proven that. At one point, I thought he was more of just a man guy, but he's become pretty much everything. I mean, he can play. He's really good, though, in press coverage. And so if you play a lot of cover 3 and you play a lot of man, that would be best, right? So that's why I think he succeeded after New England. He went to Carolina, where he was okay. He was kind of dealing with injuries. But then he really went to Indy. He was really good. And then he went to Dallas, and he was really good. And he had a bad playoff game against the Packers, but he's still really good. Like, he's a really good number 2 corner at this point. So it's just the problem when he becomes the number 1. It's just the physical limitations of his age at times show up. But it's still rare, though. He still plays at a high level. Adoree Jackson, I've always been a fan of. He's got great speed. I think he's more of a man coverage corner in a blitzing defense than a zone coverage corner because of the speed and ability to match people with that speed. He's a veteran at this point. I think he's a good number 2 if you're a team looking to upgrade your number 2 and you play man, but you can also play zone. Adoree is that guy. Chidobe Awuzie played at an elite level in 2022. Got injured, I believe. Came back in 2023. Or maybe it was elite in 2021, sorry. Then he got hurt in 2022. Then in 2023, he was hit and miss. So it depends what you're getting out of him. He's been up and down. He's been a bit inconsistent, but he's a good player. He's a perimeter corner. That's probably a good number 2. He's a borderline number 1 at times, but that was a couple years ago. Kenny Moore, an excellent nickel corner he's really smart, can tackle really well, more of a zone player. Steven Nelson, zone-based corner, a weak number 2. You probably want him more as your number 4. You know, like your number 4 or your number 3 in terms of like if you have 3 as you have your outside corners, your number 2, right? And then you have your 3 as your nickel. You kind of want him as like your number 4, like a veteran that can do it. He can play outside, but he's kind of limited. But if you put him in the right system like Houston, he can be a number 2. You understand what I'm saying? Michael Davis had some really good moments throughout his career. I think he's been underrated throughout a majority of his career. Had a little bit of a tough season this year, though. And I think, in my opinion, Michael Davis underachieved this year because he played with the Chargers under Brandon Staley, and Brandon Staley sucks as a coach, and Brandon Staley put him in man press coverage. And Michael Davis, the limitation of his game, he can't run. He's not that fast, right? So if you put him in a system where he plays at the line of scrimmage and he presses and maybe plays some zone, I think he's good. But if you play him in a system where he's defending Tyreek Hill man on man and Tyreek Hill's running a fade route, well, he's going to get burnt for 80 yards. So that's just the way it goes, right? So those are the corners. Brandon says Xavier Howard to the Texans. I actually thought about that one. I'm not going to lie. You probably think I'm lying, but I actually thought about that one. I'm doing my free agency predictions right now, and it's one of the teams I have in that conversation for sure. I think it's possible. I think Howard to go along with Stingley would be a really, really good move. And I know that Nick Caserio at least has valued corners, right? Nick Caserio comes from New England, right? Bill Belichick. And he drafted Derek Stingley in the top 5, right? So he's probably willing to give some money to the corner position. Safeties are next. Antoine Winfield Jr. is the best safety on the market. He is one of the best safeties, if not the best safety in the NFL, to be honest with you. He's that good. He could play in any system. He could play strong, free, nickel, blitz, zone, man. Honestly, doesn't matter. Like, he can fly off the edge and strip the quarterback. He can jump up in the back end and pick the ball off. I've always loved Antoine Winfield Jr. He was like my favorite player, or one of my favorite players in the 2020. Was it 2020 draft? Right? And I remember him getting drafted. This is just tangent Mitch time. I remember him getting drafted by the Bucks, and I was so excited because I became a Bucks fan because of Tom Brady at that time. So I was like, dude, this guy's sick. Like, this guy's going to be a stud. So I remember being pumped about that. Xavier McKinney had an excellent season for the Giants. He's been a little bit more inconsistent than Winfield or even Kyle Duggar, in my opinion, but McKinney at his high end, I really like what he offers. He's really smart, high IQ player. He can play man on tight ends. He's mostly a strong safety, but he could kind of play anywhere. And I think he would be a player that could upgrade a team needs a safety upgrade, needs a guy that can shadow a tight end, needs a guy that can play deep in the defense, needs a guy that can make plays near the line of scrimmage. He could kind of do everything. The problem with him has been injuries. He's had a lot of injuries, but he's been a really good player throughout his career. Kyle Duggar, I love Kyle Duggar. I just think he's maybe a little bit scheme specific. I do wonder how he would play in a different defense other than New England, is I guess what I'm wondering. But the man is an absolute freak. He is big, physical, fast. He is what you think of a strong safety. In 1995, he would have been a box safety. But nowadays, he is he can cover tight ends. He can fly and pick the ball off in the flat. He can play in the box as a linebacker. They actually made him their free safety this year. It wasn't really a good idea. He can do it. It's not his best trait, but I think that was what was underwhelming about this past season from Duggar. He's a beast. He's mostly a box player that can also give you sub linebacker ability, which means he can play in your nickel package as a linebacker. That is where he's best, but they played him at free safety. I don't know why. Cameron Curl is a traditional strong safety. He can make 100 tackles a year. He's not a great ball playmaker, in terms of interceptions, but he's a really steady tackler all over the run game and just a really steady player. Steady safety. He's not sexy. You don't watch him you watch Winfield blitzing someone or Duggar just flying around making plays, knocking people around. Curl is just a solid player. And you look at the end of the game and he's got 10 tackles. Jordan Whitehead has played really well for the Jets, played on the Bucs Super Bowl defense. Before that, hard hitter, box safety, strong safety, really good in that Jet system. I kind of question the fit, given that he was in Tampa with Bulls and it was a lot different from the system in New York. But I think actually he's been a better player in New York, especially when it comes to coverage. Maybe you refine what he needs to do a little bit, play near the line of scrimmage, and he becomes just that much better. Geno Stone, who had, I think 7 picks this year, is my number 6 safety on this list, which just speaks to how many safeties there are. Really good playmaker in the back end of the defense. He's a free safety, and he's a ball hawk. I've liked Geno Stone even before I feel like he blew up this year. It's just they have a lot of safeties in Baltimore. It looks like he's going to end up leaving. CJ Gardner-Johnson, probably going to leave Detroit. I don't know if they're going to bring him back. I don't know. But he could play free safety or nickel. He's got an attitude to him, and that can be good and bad at times, but it brings an edge to a defense. Micah Hyde, veteran safety, has deteriorated the last 2 seasons a little bit, but he's still Micah Hyde. He used to be one of the best safeties in the NFL, especially at free safety. Ball hawk, understands defenses. If you're in a zone-heavy team, that's where you want to go, Micah Hyde. Jordan Fuller, I think super underrated. Super underrated. Playmaker. Forced fumbles. I think he had 3 interceptions. I think he had 3 off the top of my head. Rams love him. They think he's like a football savant. He's a really good player. Julian Blackmon, really good tackler. Mostly a box safety, although he can play both strong and free. I think he had his best coverage season of his career this year. and he's ascending after having a couple of seasons with injuries. Malia says, when you win a Super Bowl, does everyone on your team want to make more money if they're free agents? Oftentimes that's the case. That's not always the case, but oftentimes you get the disease of me, is what it's called. The disease of me. You're selfish. You want the best for you. You got that Super Bowl ring. And typically you're like, I'm going to go somewhere and I'm going to make dough and I don't really care like about winning. Like, let's just set my family up. And it makes sense. It makes sense. Honestly, I can't fault anybody. You think CJ goes back to Detroit? I'd like to see that just because I felt like we didn't really get to see it. Like, he was hurt a lot, and then he ended up coming back in the playoffs, and I felt like he made their defense better in the playoffs. So I'd like to see him back in Detroit personally. All right, guys. Well, that's my free agency preview. It's been a long one. It's been nearly an hour or 45 minutes. So I'll have the timestamps for everybody. But thank you so much if you tuned in live. My free agency prediction videos will be out this week. I'll be having probably 3-4 prediction videos on free agency, a bunch of different free agents, probably close to 100, if not more. I'm probably going to do a separate one for just quarterbacks, and then we'll talk about the rest of the free agents throughout the course of the week. Make sure to follow my Bleacher Report stuff. I've been doing a lot for Bleacher Report lately, so make sure to check that out, guys. It would really mean a lot to me to go check that stuff out. And it's exclusive content that you can't find here on YouTube. So if you like my content on YouTube, you'll like my content on BR as well. That I do videos there that I don't do here. So Gronk, smite the like button. Subscribe, guys, if you haven't already. It's Mitch. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you later. Deuces, guys.